Well, good evening, good evening. It's the first of the seasoning. I don't think that's a saying. Something popped into my head there, George. Okay, George, how are you, man?
Yeah, pretty good.
Things going well? Life's going well?
Everything's as it should be.
Yeah, nah. Hello, welcome to the show, Big Hairy News. We do this every night at 10 o'clock. We're broadcast both on the internet and on the internet. We do an audio podcast as well. So for those of you who are picking this up for the first time tonight, or if you're seeing this in demand for the first time tonight, if you enjoy what you see, the other thing you can do is subscribe to our daily audio podcast, which is scrolling along the bottom of the screen if you're watching right now. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify as well. Just search for hashtag BHN or Big Hairy News, and the episode every night gets uploaded as audio content as well. And you can catch up on things that you missed. Catch up on things that you might want to hear. Also, it's a good way of doing it because it means that you can go into the conversation tomorrow morning on your way to work. We can just talk about that, George. Are you getting an echo coming back on you?
I was before.
You're right now?
I can hear it. No, I can hear it.
All right. Are you getting an echo, or you're locked in? You're okay.
I can get an echo. I am getting an echo.
So we can't hear it on this end. For people who are watching us, do you want to let us know out there? Is there an echo going on? Is George echoing at all? One of the things you might be able to do.
Hello,
George,
test. My name is George.
If you're not echoing, then perhaps you can log off and then log back on to see if it's working for you, because it sounds fine on my end, and we'll just wait to see.
No, I just wondered if your speakers were still on.
My speakers are still on, but I couldn't hear it. Does it make any difference to you now?
Hello, test. All good now.
So that was my end. That was my fault. I apologize about that. Hey, we are looking to have a chat tonight about a bunch of stuff. I'm actually quite excited about one of the conversations. We've been talking obviously about Roe versus Wade for a good portion of this week, each night actually. And yesterday on one of the broadcasts, there was a comment that was made, which is a fairly common comment. It's been a common comment since the mandates came out November-ish of last year, which is, this thing about body autonomy. All of a sudden, for example, anti-vaxxers and right-wingers wanted to start to use the phrase "my body, my choice," like how women have been using that statement for the abortion rules, and a lot of conservative right-wingers have been saying, no, it's not your body. But then as soon as they wanted to use it for the vaccine, they adopted the saying and they started using it for themselves. Now, it was a conversation that popped up in one of the feeds last night, and people started talking a bit about it. And I thought, I've got some pretty clear understandings as to why, in my opinion, that's a nonsense argument. It's a different argument. But I actually thought for the first time last night, well, I wonder what an ethicist would say about these two arguments, and particularly a bioethicist would say about this. Is this something that a bioethicist would go, actually, there is comparable arguments here, or not? So that's what we've got for tonight. Towards the end of the show, Elizabeth Fenton, Dr Elizabeth Fenton from Otago University, will be joining us. She is a bioethicist in the Bioethics Centre, and she's going to be talking to us about the concept of is there a difference, ethically speaking, from your freedom to make a choice around Roe versus Wade when you're going to have an abortion, and your freedom of choice to have or not have a vaccine. So because I want to put this conversation to bed, and if it's a load of nonsense, which I kind of think it is, but I guess I'm trying not to be too arrogant and saying I've got the answers all the time. But if it's a load of nonsense, I want to put good information out there so we can hear it, consume it, and then understand it better, rather than just these kind of trope sayings, which to me feel like they don't serve any purpose. You all right with that, George?
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, usually people yeah, it will make sense when we get to it, but usually those people are sort of coming from a place of bad faith. Like
Yeah.
they're like, wait, for you, if this isn't true, then this other thing can't be true. I always want to ask those people what they actually think, because they're trying to sort of catch you in some sort of logic spiral. Yeah, and it's sort of annoying. There's
Yeah.
never seems to be on the same page.
So if you're watching right now, have a think about that from an ethical point of view. Do you think ethically that they're the same or that they're different? Do you think it's a fair enough point to make my body, my choice? I don't want a vaccine to my body, my choice about abortions? Or do you think it's different? I'll leave it at that. I have some, for me, it seems pretty easy and pretty clear, but just because that argument's being made by a certain sector of society, I sort of either want to put it to bed or I want to go, okay, so ethically speaking, there is a conversation to be had. Let's now have that conversation. Now, that's a pre-recorded conversation, so I already know where it's going to go, so I don't want to kind of beat it up too much like it's a, hey, we'll all be surprised. I know what is said in that conversation, but I want you to have sort of the freedom to think about it yourself first, and then we'll get to the conversation a bit later on. Also, we're going to have a quick look, perhaps, at this news around NATO with, the Russia war still going on, the invasion of Ukraine still going on, and Finland and Sweden look like they're set to join NATO. I want to bring up some maps and show you the area and show you what that means for Russia. Very quickly, they're becoming encircled by NATO countries, and it's I don't know. We talk about what good can come from bad sometimes, and maybe from this invasion, if it ends up that all those countries on Russia's border end up being a part of NATO, then that's probably long-term quite a bad thing for Russia. So we'll have a look at that as well. And also, the January 6th committees today were fascinating. I, like many people, the very first January 6th committee that was on, I was glued to it, watched it, almost with me popcorn, wanted to see how it was going to go. Since then, there's been 5 other ones. This was the 6th. I haven't been quite so intensely involved with them, kind of just checking the highlights of them to find out what's going on. For some reason this morning, I jumped up, and quite often I check my news feeds and stuff, and there was a news feed there of a commentator sort of replaying the whole thing. And again, today's January 6th was amazing. It was amazing, and it was fascinating, and I want to play you some clips from it. Now, we haven't reviewed all of the committees, each session they've done, but today was so damning. Woodward and Bernstein, the guys that were the journalists that sort of brought into the light the Watergate scandal, they're saying that they think this is the end of Trump. And they're saying that it's far worse than what Watergate was, assuming that the witness today is not proven to be lying. And there's no hint that that's going to happen. If it's all true, as appeared to be today, these people who have been through something like this before with Nixon are saying this is the end of Trump from today's committee. Now, as been said before about Trump, and it's never actually happened, much like a cockroach, he seems to be able to survive for years and years without a head. But we will have a look at some of the big things that come from that today, and you guys can make up your mind for yourself. Where I wanted to actually start, though, George, is kind of completely off all those news topics. I watched the Māori All Blacks tonight. I watched the first half of the game, and I was just reminded again the conversation around the haka, and how there are some people who see the haka as sort of an aggressive, kind of a waste of time, maybe. They don't really respect it for what it is. I've said for a long time, my personal opinion is the haka in general is one of the most respectful and one of the most incredibly emotional outpourings that a New Zealander can see or receive. I want to play a little bit of this from tonight's game, if you didn't see it. It's actually after the haka. The haka is finished. Now, there was a Māori All Black called Sean Wainui, and Sean Wainui passed away last year. He meant a lot to the Māori All Blacks. He was obviously a colleague of all these guys. He was only young, so he's a current player. And so at the end of the haka, so the haka is finished in this imagery that you're seeing, his family came on to receive a jersey that had been laid out by the Irish team. This probably has history that a few years ago when the Māori All Blacks were playing in Ireland, one of the coaches, I think his name was Alex or Andrew Foley, had passed away in that week, and so they laid out a jersey for him, and the Irish team, it might have been Munster, picked up that jersey, and there was it was quite an emotional ceremony. I just wanted to play this bit because I think that the haka and And that kind of, when I say warrior mentality, I guess I'm saying what comes with it, to me, always comes across as so respectful and so emotional. I just wanted to play this last part of it. We don't really need the sound. I guess we can have the sound on. So this is Sean's family coming out, and there you can see the jersey if you're watching in the background, the green jersey, because the Irish laid it out with the number 11 on the back because that was Sean's number. And I want you just to have a look at the Māori All Blacks as they're standing, and they stayed in their formation. And they're going to come into the background now. They stayed in their formation, just waiting for Wainui's family to pick up the jersey. And you can see TJ Perenara at the front kind of gives it that, that kind of nod. They kind of, yep. And so, and you watch the mum points up to, that's a picture of Sean in the background behind the Māori All Blacks. There you go. Points up to a picture of him. I don't know. There's just something about it that the respect that is shown with it. The guys stay there, they stay in formation, they wait for the family to leave the field altogether. The Irish are standing in a circle on the other side of the halfway, which you can't see in this. And it's like, do that first. They're watching them leave the field, and then the game started. I just think it was one of those moments. I think it's cool to celebrate the unique culture we have in New Zealand, which is the Māori culture. That is the unique culture to New Zealand, and to go, actually, some of these moments are really important and are really special. And I thought that was a really special moment, and I guess I wanted to share it tonight. So it's more than just sports, George. I know that you might roll your eyes talking rugby, but it was more about what came with it.
Why would I roll my eyes? I
don't know. When we talk rugby, sometimes I think, it's not if it's not F1. Sometimes I think, F1 is the deal. So anyway,
I love rugby. I went and watched the Blues Crusaders game at Carisbrook pub, like a true Dunedin night.
Nice. Yeah, I'm going to.
There's my credentials.
I'm going to the Irish All Blacks game Saturday week here in Dunedin. My mates are coming down from Christchurch, got me a ticket, and I'm going to go along because, of course, as we probably know, Patrick. Mother's maiden name was Mulligan. Grandparents are straight out of Belfast. It's sort of my two teams. Got the Irish team, got the All Blacks team. Going to watch them at Frosty Boy Stadium. Looking forward to it as well. Alrighty, let us start. I think we're going to start with the January 6th committee. Now, George, you haven't seen all of these, so I'm actually really interested to get your feedback on some of what I'm going to show you, because some of the main points to come out of this January 6th committee from today, I'll give you some of the points and then I'll play some of the clips. Donald Trump knew that there were weapons amongst the crowd, and he knew that the weapons were going to go and march down towards the Capitol. Another revelation that came out, now I will be fair and clear, it is that is first-hand information, that one from this witness. The next revelation is second-hand information because she was told by someone else, and that was Trump attacked a Secret Service agent, and that Trump tried to basically overtake the limousine he was in to drive it down to the Capitol. Now, the Secret Service have all said that they would testify that that didn't happen, that one point. However, the clip that I'm going to play you, you'll see that the witness was asked if it was corrected by the person who said it. So someone said it to someone who told her. The original someone was also in the room, and they didn't correct the storyline. In other words, say it was wrong. Also, General Michael Flynn, it was just an amazing response by General Michael Flynn, and also some standover mafia type tactics being used by the Trump team when it comes to those testifying. So let's have a look at this first part. This first part is about Trump knowing that there was weapons there. It's in two parts, and the first part is communication between the police, right? It's recorded communication between the police where they are identifying the people who have weapons. So this sets the scene to say that there were weapons there. Step one.
There's an individual who's in a tree. He's going to be a white male, about 6 feet tall, 10 build, brown cowboy boots. He's got blue jeans and a blue jean jacket, and underneath the blue jean jacket, the complainant both saw stock with AR-15. He's going to be with a group of individuals, about 5 to 8 other individuals. Two of the individuals in that group at the base of the tree, near the porta potties, were wearing green fatigues. Green olive drab style fatigues, about 5'8", 5'9", skinny white males, brown cowboy boots. They had Glock style pistols in their waistband. 8736 with the message that subject weapon on his right hip. After that, he's in the tree.
Motor 1, make sure PPD knows they have an elevated threat in the tree south side of Constitution Avenue. Look for the Don't Tread on Me flag, American flag face mask, cowboy boots, weapon on the right side hip.
I got 3 men walking down the street in fatigue while carrying AR-15, copy at 14th and Independent.
So that last one, if you're listening to the audio, which was a bit hard to hear, 3 men walking down the street carrying AR-15s. So that was confirmation that weapons were there. But then the next part of it has to be linked back to Donald Trump to know if he knew they were there. Well, there was conversations around the size of the crowd, and Donald Trump wasn't happy with the size of the crowd because he's the most thin-skinned man on the face of the planet, and he needs to always have the biggest crowd possible. There were people outside the crowd, outside what they call the mags, which is the magnetic resonance imaging thing where people walk through, basically the metal detector. So when you hear them talking about shut down the mags, they're talking about the metal detectors, and they were on the other side of the mags because they had weapons, and Trump actively says, they didn't bring weapons for me, let them in, shut down the mags. So this is evidence that Donald Trump knew that there was weapons there on the 6th and that they were going to be going down towards the Capitol building.
In one text, you write, but the crowd looks good from this vantage point as long as we get the shot. He was effing furious. And the text messages also stress that President Trump kept mentioning the OTR, an off-the-record movement. We're going to come back and ask you about that in a minute. But could you tell us, first of all, who it is in the text who was furious?
The he in that text that I was referring to was the president.
And why was he furious, Ms. Hutchinson?
He was furious because he wanted the arena that we had on the Ellipse to be maxed out at capacity for all attendees. The advance team had relayed to him that the mags were free-flowing. Everybody who wanted to come in had already come in, but he still was angry about the extra space and wanted more people to come in.
And did you go to the rally in the presidential motorcade?
I was there, yes, in the motorcade.
And were you backstage with the president and other members of his staff and family?
I was.
And you told us, Ms. Hutchinson, about particular comments that you heard while you were in the tent area.
When we were in the offstage announce area tent behind the stage, he was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. One of the reasons, which I've previously stated, was because he wanted it to be full and for people to not feel excluded because they'd come far to watch him at the rally. And he felt the mags were at fault for not letting everybody in. But another leading reason, and likely the primary reason, is because he wanted it full and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deemed as weapons and our weapons.
So in case that was unclear, it was she was saying, who's the witness for today, that Trump was angry because people with weapons weren't being let through the mags.
But when we were in the offstage announce tent, I was part of a conversation. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that the president wanted to take the mags away and said that the armed individuals were not there to hurt him?
That's a fair assessment.
So there you go. So Trump knew there was weapons there, confirmed by the police. Trump knew there was weapons there. Trump knew that the weapons weren't there to worry him. So all of that conversation around no one knowing there was weapons there was no evidence of weapons there, is all gone in an instant. George, you want to offer something?
Yeah. Like this is fascinating, in a sense. Like, I mean, I'm not too concerned with whether, what sort of legal outcome comes of this committee and all that sort of thing. It's more of a show deal. But it's really interesting getting insight into Trump's thinking on that day, because I reckon obviously he wanted armed people there. That's sort of what that confirms.
Yeah.
And then the stuff in the with the vehicle, which do we have
next,
that
yeah.
testimony as well? Well, I guess we can play that.
Do you want to roll? Should we roll that now?
Yeah, I'll come back around to it.
All right. So this is a conversation around the vehicle. This is one of the things that people have been talking about. I don't think this is the worst thing, but it's an allegation that is secondhand. But as we say, I'm going to let it play through to the end, because at the very end, the congresswoman asks, or the senator anyway, asks if the person who was the source of the original information, who was in the room, although not telling the story, corrected anything, and the witness says no. So even though it's technically secondhand, the person who was firsthand didn't correct any of the information. So have a look. This is Donald Trump when he got off stage, wanting to go to the Capitol where the people, the insurrectionists, were marching. And this is, I guess we'll have to be fair and say, the allegations of what happened in the car.
Ms. Hutchinson, when you returned to the White House in the motorcade after the president's speech, where did you go?
When I returned to the White House, I walked upstairs towards the Chief of Staff's office, and I noticed Mr. Ornato lingering outside of the office. Once we had made eye contact, he quickly waved me to go into his office, which was just across the hall from mine. When I went in, he shut the door, and I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair, just looking somewhat discombobulated and a little lost. I looked at Tony, and he had said, "Did you effing hear what happened in the Beast?" I said, "No, Tony, I just got back. What happened?" Tony proceeded to tell me that...
For clarity, the Beast is what they call the armored limo. So did you hear what happened in the armored limo?
When the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible and likely to happen, but that Bobby had more information. So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol, and when Bobby had relayed to him, "We're not, we don't have the assets to do it, it's not secure, we're going back to the West Wing," the president had very strong, a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
And was Mr. Engel in the room as Mr. Ornato told you this story?
He was.
Did Mr. Engel correct or disagree with any part of the story from Mr. Ornato?
Mr. Engel did not correct or disagree with any part of the story.
Did Mr. Engel or Mr. Ornato ever after that tell you that what Mr. Ornato had just said was untrue?
Neither Mr. Ornato nor Mr. Engel told me ever that it was untrue.
There you go, George. Floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, I this is the one I'm interested in, mainly because it's the most, sort of cartoonish. Love Trump
Salacious?
being cartoonish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not like the worst one, but it's the more sort of indicative of me just sort of trying to get a bead on his thinking that day, because I'm sure Trump didn't even really know how he was going to proceed with it. Obviously, it was sort of established that he wanted his armed friends at Capitol Hill, and then wanted to go there. And I guess, in the sort of most planned out scenario of that, to go to Capitol Hill to sort of meet his people and sort of assume the presidency in a way, or a sort of like a sort of government within a government, or a coup, or whatever you want to call it, which would have failed. Possibly would have been a lot bloodier, because he would have been at the center of it. Would have been probably funnier, or because Trump would have been at the center of it. Like, just imagine it's Trump in Pelosi's office on the phone with his boots up on the desk.
Yeah.
But yeah.
As I said,
Sorry.
there are Secret Service agents who have said that they'll testify that didn't happen. And I think I saw that on CNN as a commentary. But the point that was made after that is everyone who is suggesting it didn't happen, none of them are currently under oath and before the Senate. Once they become under oath, once they get under oath, we'll see if their story is the same or not. But that, as I said, that was technically secondhand, but the person who gave the first-hand account was in the room and didn't correct anything. So it's pretty much first-hand.
Yeah, and with the Secret Service, I mean, there's a sort of contradiction in when democracies have intelligence services, right? Because intelligence services are professional liars and professional sort of, mouth zip sort of people. Of course, they're going to sort of, they're not going to admit that a president, that they lost control of a situation, or whatever it is. I know, maybe shit will come out eventually, but yeah.
One of the reasons that this witness has been seen to be so significant is she was working in the West Wing. They showed a map of the hallway during this, and her office was perhaps less than 10 meters from the Oval Office. So she's there and she's hearing these conversations. And as you heard the first one, she was backstage when the conversation was had about the gun. So this is not, someone getting a tip or someone understanding something. This is someone who was actually literally there. And that's why some are saying that this is so devastating. I want to play you a clip. I was a bit confused as to why they played this clip, other than perhaps they just want to show how ridiculous Trump's inner circle was. It didn't necessarily add to today's conversation from the witness, but it was General Michael Flynn. And he gets asked the most simple layup softball questions, and he can't answer them. So this is a little bit set aside from perhaps the conversation around today's witness. It's part of today's testimony. I just wanted to play it because you talk about cartoonish, George. This is ridiculous. He basically gets asked, was it an appropriate action? Was that violence appropriate? And he just would not answer it. Would not answer it at all. Let's have a look at General Michael Flynn. General Michael Flynn, goodness gracious me, how far people can fall.
So General Flynn has appeared before this committee, and when he appeared before our committee, he took the fifth. Let's briefly view a clip of General Mike Flynn taking the Fifth Amendment. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
It's a lay down Mazia.
Yes.
Was the violence justified? Those police officers who died, and was it justified?
All right, we're back. Congressman Cheney, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
Can I get a clarification? Is that a moral question, or are you asking a legal question?
I'm asking both.
I said,
Do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified morally?
take the fifth.
You believe the violence on January 6th was justified legally?
Fifth.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The fifth.
So the last question, if it wasn't clear for those especially listening, he was asked, do you believe in a peaceful transition of power in America? and he pleaded the Fifth to it. And just so you know, I've got it up here on Wikipedia. The Fifth Amendment, I was going to do it basically, but I thought maybe I'll read it and say exactly what it is. But it's basically the right not to answer a question in case you self-incriminate yourself. It's to stop you from incriminating yourself against activity. So when people plead the Fifth, it doesn't always mean they're guilty of a crime, but obviously it's saying I'm not going to answer this in case my answer leads to a criminal conviction, an indictment, whatever the correct terminology is. So he chose to plead the Fifth even to the question, the theoretical question of does he believe in a peaceful transition of power in government?
Yeah, I mean, fair enough when you're getting sort of that you're in this weird sort of spot where you're getting investigated by your political enemies. Like the whole sort of congressional committee model is it seems sort of bizarre to me, right? That Miss Cheney sort of runs this court. Like surely that's the smartest thing for him to do, especially with I was confused about the question. What does she mean? Violence on the January 6th? Does she mean like the rioters?
Yeah, she was saying was the people entering the building, smashing windows, killing people. Was that appropriate?
Because if he really wanted to fuck around with it, he could twist that, right? Because there was when she said the violence justified it, I suddenly thought of like that video of the Capitol police guy shooting that lady in the head, that sort of thing. Anyway,
One more clip. Yeah, one more clip. And this last clip is how they wrapped up. And I don't think Ms. Cheney, she's not running it. I think she's the second in charge of this thing. But she had the question. She had the floor today.
Well, she certainly has a lot of power over this committee, including having sort of blocking people from testifying in this committee that are friends of her family, but are basically pro-Trump lawyers who were involved in all this. So it's certainly not some immaculate legal body, right?
Yeah, and no one should think that she is all of a sudden the second savior because she happens to be asking the questions in this. She is basically voted for and along with Trump for his whole presidential. They've had a disagreement at the end, and she disagrees with this end of his tenure. But as far as it comes to politics and policy, they're on the same page. So. Yeah, but I mean, I guess I wonder if one of the reasons she's doing a lot of the questioning for this is she is a Republican, and the Republican Party actively didn't want anybody to be on this panel because they wanted it to be able to say this is not bipartisan. So what they've had to do is say that she is a rhino, and she's got it into Trump, so she's not a real Republican. But I wonder if one of the reasons she's asking the questions is because she's a Republican, it therefore can't really be said. It can't be said, but it's harder to say that this is just a vendetta from one side against the other because she's in the Republican side, perhaps. They wrapped up this conversation. One of the accusations that's been made during this is witness tampering, and so they wrapped up the conversation today by Ms. Cheney talking about what had happened to some previous witnesses and what previous witnesses had reported happening to them, hearing from people in and around Team Trump. And if you listen to this and you've watched The Sopranos, just think how The Sopranos used to stand over people and say, this will be good for you, won't it? If it's good for you, it'll be good for us. If it's good for us, you'll be okay. Just have a think about the way that the mafia kind of heavy-handedly stands over people with some of this witness testimony.
While our committee has seen many witnesses, including many Republicans, testify fully and forthrightly, this has not been true of every witness. And we have received evidence of one particular practice that raises significant concern. Our committee commonly asks witnesses connected to Mr. Trump's administration or campaign whether they've been contacted by any of their former colleagues or anyone else who attempted to influence or impact their testimony. Without identifying any of the individuals involved, let me show you a couple of samples of answers we received to this question. First, here's how one witness described phone calls from people interested in that witness's testimony. Quote, "What they said to me is, as long as I continue to be a team player, they know I'm on the right team. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting who I need to protect. You know I'll continue to stay in good graces in Trump world. And they have reminded me a couple of times that Trump does read transcripts, and just keep that in mind as I proceed through my interviews with the committee." Here's another sample in a different context. This is a call received by one of our witnesses. Quote, "A person let me know you have your deposition tomorrow. He wants me to let you know he's thinking about you. He knows you're loyal and you're going to do the right thing when you go in for your deposition." I think most Americans know that attempting to influence witnesses to testify untruthfully presents very serious concerns. We will be discussing these issues as a committee, carefully considering our next steps. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
And that's it. So, I mean, that could just be lifted from a Sopranos script, you know, the way that that was worded. So, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's very, it does remind me of Woodward and Bernstein Nixon shit, right? The sort of like, you know, remember your loyalties and that sort of thing. And it also, yeah, it made me think of the conversation before about the Secret Service and how their loyalties are to sort of themselves, right? To not sort of get involved when they can help it in these sorts of things.
yeah, so look, it's fascinating. Gosh, how many people in the past? I mean, you can just go to YouTube and look up a number of people that said Trump would never win, and you know, grab him by the pussy. That was going to be the thing that knocked Trump out, and you know, whatever it was, there was nothing that knocked him out. And I was saying the other night to Chewy that, you know, if it was Trump against Biden the next time, I think Trump wins. Will this make any difference? Well, there are people who are far more up with the play, far more knowledgeable in these worlds than I, who are saying this could and should and will, now their words, be the end of Trump's political aspirations. I guess that is yet to be seen. And as we said last night and the night before, you know, if this stuff going on is not the turning point for the Democrats to break that cycle of, midterm election losses for the non-incumbent president, then nothing ever will be. So this is just another one of those. If they can't use this, then gosh, it's fascinating. People are saying that he's never going to be. Yeah, I always get confused between congresswomen and senators, House of Representatives, so it's congresswomen. My opinion is Trump and his cronies will never get convicted at a U.S. federal court requires a unanimous jury verdict. I think probably it's not even so much about a conviction for a crime. It's probably about removing him from the ability to run again. Perhaps. David says, is the global far conservative movement having a psychotic episode? So, yeah. Anyway, anything else you want to wrap up to do with the January 6th committee there, George, before we move into having a look at NATO?
No, I mean, dude, the Republican primaries are going to be fun, though. The Republican presidential primaries, when's that? I mean, it's usually every seems like it's every year that we get started with that sort of thing.
Well, normally they'll probably be started. I mean, it's a 4-year cycle for them. And so that's what, 2024, because 2020 was their election. So probably the start of next year, start of 2023, you'll start seeing people kind of winding up, and then by the middle to end of next year, then they will be absolutely in lockstep with it. So yeah, next year is when you'll start to see them going forward. It's still a big question though around Joe Biden and what do the Democrats do. I think Democrats can't win with Joe Biden. I think DeSantis beats Joe Biden as well. And I was watching Kamala Harris today actually talking about the Roe versus Wade, and there is nothing inspiring about Kamala Harris to get people to vote for her as president either. So actually, you know, they were talking last time, about electing Joe Biden, and he'd bring it back to like the new normal. He'd almost take a step backwards to get away from Trump and return things, but they're going to be in exactly the same position in 2024. If it's not with Trump and it's with DeSantis, it's still going to be that pretty, you know, shocking Trumpian type election, even if it's not with Trump, because that's the current state of the Republicans. So who knows? I think the Democrats have made a rod for their back by putting Biden in last time around, and I guess they now got to try and figure out what they're going to do with that rod. Are they going to bend it, or are they going to stay with it? Alrighty, coming up shortly, we are going to be having a chat to a bioethicist about the bioethical question around quote-unquote forced to be given a vaccine and forced to carry a child to term. Is there a parallel between those two things? That'll be coming up shortly. Also, as a reminder, as you see scrolling along the bottom of your screen, we do have a daily audio podcast. If you've just joined us and you missed the first part of the show, obviously this will be uploaded on all the video platforms once we're done. But also, if you go and subscribe to our daily audio podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify as well, then this episode will just be put into your device and it'll be there for you when you wake up in the morning, so you can listen to it on the way to work. So a quick one for you now. Let's have a look at what's happened today with NATO, because it's particularly interesting. Turkey had an objection to Finland and Sweden becoming a part of NATO. My understanding, and a little bit of research I've done on it, is that's because some of the Scandinavian countries had an acknowledgement of some Kurdish parties that Turkey saw as terrorist organizations. Between the three of them, they've come to some kind of arrangement and some kind of agreement that will mean Turkey will not object to Finland and Sweden entering NATO. From the story we've got here, oh gosh, I had some pieces highlighted, but I've clicked on it, so the highlighting has gone away.
There's a huge one is like extradition. So there's like hundreds of thousands of Kurdish refugees in Sweden, and also countries like Sweden are often used as sort of places for Kurdish groups, sort of non-state groups, to have their sort of like embassies for Europe.
Yep.
And that sort of thing. So yeah, there's touchy stuff around that.
So the story says Sweden and Finland had historically they've declined to seek NATO membership, partly because of mixed public opinion and caution around their security relationship with Russia. But that dramatically changed after Russia launched an unprovoked attack on Ukraine in February, prompting both countries to ask to join. It means that Swedish and Finnish leaders will be able to attend the NATO summit on Wednesday and Thursday as invitees, meaning that their countries are on a firm path to full membership, subject only to ratification by member states. That is considered a technical step. Now, to have a look what that means, these are the NATO countries in Europe. I'll zoom in that a little bit. So this is, I think that's Finland and that's Sweden, or that's Sweden.
No, other way around.
Finland, that's Sweden. Okay. So Sweden here, next to Norway, Finland here, of course, Russia here. So Finland has a border with Russia right there. And then, of course, you've got, I think this is Belarus, and this is Ukraine, and then this is a small...
Moldova.
It is Moldova, you're right. Thank you for reminding me of that. And so I think once this is sorted out with Ukraine will probably become a part of NATO quite quickly. They can't become a part of NATO right now, because if they did, that means NATO is at war with Russia, because that's what happens is if you invade one, you invade all. So that's going to have to wait for that to get sorted out. But then you're going to have basically the western border. We'll see what happens with Belarus, but pretty much the western border down to the Black Sea, NATO countries as a protection, as a group around Russia, which is going to make for a particularly interesting situation. And, you know, there's lots of conversations going on at the moment about Putin's health, and that he's not doing well, and that he's got cancer, and that maybe what he's doing is trying to return to Mother Russia what was once there before he goes as his legacy. What he may have done is unified parts of Europe that previously weren't unified under a Russian banner. Under a NATO banner, under a NATO banner, which might end up being, you know, better for the whole region.
Yeah, I think this is I mean, I'm not familiar with where the Swedes and Finns stand on in terms of how they see their foreign policy, but just as an outsider, I feel like it's a mistake to join NATO when you're already in that sort of historically privileged position of being sort of in the middle and having an independent foreign policy. Being part of NATO means that, suddenly if it means you get dragged. Imagine there's another 9/11. You get dragged. Article 5 was invoked after 9/11. You get dragged into another fucking 3 decades of a war on terror, or 2 decades, sorry. And that's, and also we see with Sweden they're compromising their policies when it comes to the Kurds to make Turkey happy. I mean, whoever the idiot was that invited Turkey into NATO, they've just been a pain in the ass when it comes to came to Syria and all that stuff kicking off. But yeah, it compromises Sweden as a place that could reach out to, as it has to other non-state armed groups around the world, could reach out to the Kurds, Kurdish groups, and as they say, give peace a chance. But being part of NATO and giving in to those concessions just means that's harder.
I think probably much like any decision that gets made, whether it's a personal or a business or a economic or a whatever, it's pros and cons, isn't it? And I guess one of their biggest fears at the moment is, because Russia just walked into Ukraine, especially Finland, I guess, is worried about Russia perhaps walking into them. So I don't know if you call it the lesser of two evils, but they're thinking that their protection right now of being a part of NATO supersedes their independence for life in general.
Yeah, I don't know. With Finland, yeah, definitely. There's like, I mean, they had a war not too long ago, well, during World War II, but it's sort of recent memory, and it's a deep part of sort of Finnish identity. Recent sort of national identity is that war with Russia or the Soviet Union. But yeah, with Sweden, I mean, it doesn't seem, and I'd have to look into more of this sort of how it's been debated in Sweden, but and how experts are taking this in. But I mean, it doesn't seem like a measure based on the threat of a Russian invasion of Sweden. I know a full noise invasion of Ukraine seemed like a step too far, but I mean, really, it was already sort of happening, wasn't it? But a Russian invasion of Sweden seems totally alien. So yeah, I mean, I'll do my research and stand corrected, but Sweden also has a sort of a fairly sizable military industrial complex as well. So it will be making some cash from this, which I think was another worry of Turkey's as well. Something to do with the economics of arms dealing, which I'm not privy to, but Sweden does have a sort of arms industry that I'm sure will love this.
I was looking, because the thing about, being sucked into another war once you're a part of NATO, like the war on terror or whatever we're calling it, the 9/11 fallout. I'm not sure if it was Norway. I've just done a bit of a look because I wanted to try and find out whether it was. But one of those Scandinavian countries that did support America in that war had one soldier there. I remember it was a Daily Show piece that they went across to meet the country X's soldiers that were involved in the war on terror, and it was one soldier. Mm-hmm. So whilst I don't disagree with you about being sucked into other people's battles, and that's not always a good thing, it seems that there are also diplomatic ways that you can support someone in principle without necessarily getting involved within that group as well, perhaps.
Yeah, and then I guess the other question is, do you want to support them in principle?
Yeah.
You're right, there's lots of, I mean, lots of those wars also became UN mandated. That's how New Zealand had troops in Iraq that weren't there illegally, like the US troops were there. International laws, anything to go by. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just it surrounding Russia even more seems like in the long term, you know, not good, but it's sort of I guess it's the toing and froing of the destiny of geopolitics, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, you're heading off now, I guess, because I'm going to do a pre-recorded conversation that's going to be for 15 minutes or so. So you can head off, and we'll probably catch you later in the week.
All right.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one. Everyone can say goodbye to George. Bye, George. Bye.
Bye, George.
Bye, George.
you,
see, man. You and I will just hang out and go to this last conversation we're going to have. As I said, there has been, forever and a day these conversations, really since the mandates came in around, working and vaccines and stuff. People straight away started to say, my body, autonomy, my body, you can't force me to take a vaccine, and then when Roe versus Wade obviously happened over the weekend, this whole conversation around my body, my choice, if women can say my body, my choice, and I should be able to say my body, my choice with a vaccine, and vice versa. If women can't say it, then I can't say it. So for the first time I had to think about that, and I went, well, I wonder if there is an ethical conversation to be had here. So I spoke to Otago University today and spoke to the School of Medicine and the Bioethics Centre, and caught up with Dr Elizabeth Fenton, and really just wanted to ask that question about speaking ethically, right? Because I've got an opinion, but maybe my opinion and my bias doesn't actually mount up when it comes to the ethical issues around this idea of and I'm putting parentheses because I don't think anyone's been forced to take a vaccine, but being forced to take a vaccine. In fact, I make that point in this conversation that no one's been forced to take a vaccine. But I wanted to kind of maybe take a step backwards and have a look at the conversation in general, and then see what, again, someone much smarter and wiser than me, who maybe spends time thinking about these ethical dilemmas, and see what she had to say about it. So Dr. Elizabeth Fenton from Otago University. It's a pre-recorded conversation, but I will still be here in the background, and I will see you once this is done to wrap up the show. From Otago University School of Medicine, the Bioethics Centre is Dr. Elizabeth Fenton. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm very glad to have you on board. I feel like a bioethicist is, I kind of would like to reference as sort of an expert in opinions, sort of, can kind of say this is an okay opinion, this is not. I know that's very oversimplified and probably wrong, but that's how I sort of think about a bioethicist, about the ethics of this issue that we're talking about. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think what we're mainly trying to do is to sort out what various reasons are for different positions, what the ethical reasons are in support of something or against something. And particularly in bioethics, we're interested in medicine and science and the environment, all kinds of things that relate to human life.
So, as you're obviously aware, as the world is aware, this Roe versus Wade decision has happened over the weekend. I mean, like, I'm happy just to, as a bioethicist, give you an opportunity just to speak directly to that if you want to. I want to ask you a specific question about that to do with people making comparisons on the right to choose. But before we start, is there anything you'd like to speak to as a bioethicist about the Roe versus Wade decision?
Well, I won't get into it in too much detail. I think it's a very troubling decision. It's a very troubling decision for a lot of reasons. Ethical reasons are some of the reasons why it's troubling, but it's troubling for other reasons as well, for political reasons, for reasons of equality, civil and political rights, for lots of reasons. But yes, I do think it's a very troubling decision. And perhaps I'll just leave it at that, because I think there's probably more to say that will come out in our discussion of the specific question that you want to get to. Yeah. Excellent.
Well, let's get to that question. Now, we did a show last night, and for the last two nights, obviously, we've been talking a bit about Roe versus Wade. We had the New Zealand Council for Women on the first night talking about it, Suzanne Manning there. Last night, and I've redacted the person's name and image just because I haven't asked their permission to use it as a subject matter of the conversation. But last night, as a part of our conversation around Roe versus Wade. And to be honest with you, kind of three blokes talking about it, we were more talking about the political aspect to it. And we had Suzanne come on and talk about, you know, how it impacts women and stuff. But this comment was made on one of our broadcasts. And it's a comment that is common at the moment of how quickly, especially in America, conservative politicians and conservative voters switched into that quote unquote right to choose argument when it came about their vaccinations, whilst for the previous 40 years rejecting the right to choose conversation when it came to abortion and a woman's autonomy over her body. Now, so that's the subject matter of, I guess, the ethical conversation I want to have with you. And for people who are listening, I'll read out the post that was put on one of our broadcasts last night. It says this from a Facebook user. How come the left think freedom of choice is sacred when a woman wants an abortion, but at the same time we're happy to remove freedom of choice regarding vaccination? Hypocrisy. And I've got some pretty strong, I guess, layman's views about this, but I really thought, actually, let's get someone on who can maybe speak to this with some more authority about the ethical conversation here, about the comparison some people are making about the right to choose between those two choices, being vaccinated or getting an abortion. Now, I won't offer any opinions at all because I just want to open it up to you and say, I've got some stuff that I can add, but it's all kind of, you know, layman-y conversational stuff. But from an ethical point of view, I just want to throw it to you and say, what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of major points, but the main thing I think to emphasize is that these are two very different contexts. So the vaccine mandate occurred in a public health context about where we're looking at public health and advancing public health, and in the middle of a public health emergency or public health crisis.
Yep.
So the other context, the context of abortion, is a context of individual decision making in an individual medical context, or some people perhaps don't want to think about it as a medical decision, but in the context of a person's individual healthcare. So that's a really important point, I think, to make at the outset, that the contexts are very different. But another sort of overarching point is that we do live in New Zealand and in America in a society that gives a lot of weight to individual choice. So we live in a liberal society where individual choice and autonomy are very important, and people are generally given a lot of latitude to exercise individual choice, and its constraints on individual liberty, constraints on freedom have to, meet certain justifications. So in public health, we do start from a position where it's not about the individual.
Okay.
Public health goals are trying to advance benefits at the societal level, at the population level. And so it's important to realize that in that context, we sometimes do accept certain constraints on individual freedom or liberty or autonomy, so freedom to choose. But those constraints still have to meet a pretty high bar. In other words, there have to be good justifications for those constraints. And I think, in my view, that threshold was met for the vaccination mandate for COVID-19 because we were in a situation where we had to work quickly. There was a major public health threat, and there are sort of two ways in which we can justify those constraints on liberty in a public health situation. One is to promote a significant public benefit that can't be achieved without a lot of cooperation and everybody kind of doing something. And another reason that we might constrain individual liberty in a public health situation is to prevent harm to others. So those are two ways in which we can justify constraints on individual autonomy. And I think we met those in this circumstance. So we wanted to achieve very high levels of vaccination to protect the population as a whole and to protect vulnerable members of the population. And also you can argue that vaccination prevented harm to others. It prevented the spread of the disease. So I think the vaccination mandate did meet those criteria. So the justification for constraining individual autonomy is met in that circumstance. But in the case of individual healthcare, where it's a person receiving healthcare, it's not public health, it's individual clinical medicine or individual healthcare.
Yep.
That is that person who's receiving the harm or the benefit. And so individual choice and autonomy remains really, really critical in that context. So the justification for overriding it in those circumstances is very different.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I mean, it's funny you've worded it so eloquently and perfectly, but what I hear you saying was what I was thinking earlier, is that an abortion, for example, is about the self, about me, myself, my decision, whereas, a vaccination is about society and community. Yeah. So it's like, imposing on them versus imposing on yourself, et cetera, et cetera. I also, I don't want to go into semantics about the argument that is being had out there, but from an ethical point of view, maybe, or maybe just from an opinion point of view, there's also this element of people saying that they're had their choice taken away from them when it comes to vaccinations. In my opinion, now I know that there are ramifications for making a choice, but no one has been forced to get a vaccination. And let me play a little something from a conversation I had with someone who lost their job because they refused the vaccination. Her name is Rachel Mortimer, and I'm happy to share this. She came on the show, but also she put herself in the media telling her story. I want to just play a little bit of this so people get the idea, and I'll explain very, oh, look, I'm wearing the same hat, maybe even the same top. That's a bit sad, isn't it? Maybe even very clearly as to why I think this idea about being forced to get a vaccine is kind of nonsense. Have a listen.
This is still bullying by our government. You cannot say and define this as not bullying.
Let me ask you something. When are you getting your injection?
I won't be.
Why not?
Because I think it's going to be too dangerous.
Yeah, you're choosing not to.
I'm not choosing to do. I'm having to give up a lot of what I love for.
I agree. No, look, I agree. No, you don't need to sell me on how difficult the choice is, but the answer to the question, why aren't you getting it, is because you're choosing not to. That's accurate. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So you're making a choice. So we all have a choice.
Under duress. Yeah, but it's a choice under duress.
And that's the let's pause it. I don't know if you noticed that, but she had someone off camera whispering a choice under duress, so to get that point out there. So I don't do that to kind of embarrass or mock or tease or whatever, but to say that this is, I don't think that the comparison is even fair, because one aspect, it's like you have a choice to either get vaccinated or not, and it comes with downstream effects. The other one, you don't have a choice in some states in America now whether to carry that baby to term or not. So one, there is a choice taken away. One, there is, let's be generous and say, a difficult choice for some to make. So that's why it kind of feels a bit apples and oranges to me, sort of what you said about the differences between them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And in fact, so I agree that the vaccine mandate did not remove the choice to get vaccinated. So in other words, you were still free to choose not to get vaccinated. And that's really important, because we have laws in New Zealand, the Bill of Rights, people have a right to bodily integrity. So that is important. It means you cannot be forced to be vaccinated. That means you can't be held down and vaccinated against your will. And that was not what the vaccine mandate did. It did create consequences for choosing not to get vaccinated. So what that did was, just as you said there, it forced people to choose what they valued more. So did they value their freedom to reject an intervention that they saw as potentially harmful, but I think the science certainly was clear that the harm was fairly minimal, or to choose to preserve other things that they felt that were especially valuable to them, like their job, their career, other things, their ability to socialize, those sorts of things. So it forced a choice in that way. They had to choose to put a stake in the ground about what was more valuable to them, but it didn't remove that choice. I totally agree with that. However, it is fair to say, I think, and her word was duress, that a vaccine mandate is coercive. Okay, so it is using coercion to try to achieve a public health goal. And the question always is that coercion justified? And in this case, I think a case can be made that the coercion was justified based on the benefits of high levels of vaccination for the population and the reduction in harm to vulnerable members of the community and people who wanted to be able to move about without fear of becoming infected. So it is coercive, a vaccine mandate is coercive, but it didn't absolutely remove that choice, it didn't force that. Now, I do agree that, and some people might say the same thing about the situation in the US is still such that abortions are available in some states and not in others, but effectively, for many people, that choice has been absolute. Without a constitutional right to abortion, which is what Roe v. Wade protected, they have no way to exercise their choice to get an abortion. So it is much more, the implications of that are much more significant than they were under the mandate, I think.
Yeah, and also disproportionately impacting people with less money, etc. The wealthy will always have the ability to do that and travel. But if you're, a 6 or 10 hour drive from the nearest abortion clinic, and you first have to get there, and then you probably have to stay there, and then so there are financial penalties. You could probably draw a parallel between those two, or financial consequences. But one is saying you have a choice not to. The other one is the government saying we're removing this choice and now you've got to look after yourself elsewhere. So it still doesn't feel parallel, even though you could say both have a negative financial impact for various people. They could do.
Yeah, they could do, absolutely. That's true. But I think for the current situation in the US for many people, and I think it's probably fair to say that abortion services are, well, actually I won't say that, but it's just disproportionately going to impact low-income women and families. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and I think the evidence on that is very clear. And it's also, it's important to understand that preserving some kind of choice that's really, and as in this case, women can only exercise it if they've got fairly significant resources and personal capital. Is not really preserving any choice at all.
Is there? I'm interested as to, I have this picture in my mind of everyone sitting around in smoking jackets and having philosophical conversations about ethical issues at your offices in there at the university and going, oh, that's a very good point, pa, pa, pa. But like with this conversation about Roe versus Wade floating into New Zealand society and people showing concern about various, and I won't put you in a position to have to comment on politics or politicians, but various political perspectives, is there a conversation to be had now in New Zealand, do you think, about concerns around what may happen there from a flow-on? Or, I mean, it feels to me like that would be incredibly unlikely for anything to be impacted here. But is that something that we need to be aware of or concerned about at all, do you think?
I think the implications are significant on many levels, but perhaps unlikely to change access to abortion in New Zealand. I certainly hope that's the case. However, having said that, I think many people felt that for a long time that Roe v. Wade was not going to be overturned in the US because it had been settled law for quite some time. But as other people have said, there were lots of problems with that law. So, and I'm not qualified really to go into the ins and outs of that because it's not the legal aspects of it. I'm not my area of expertise, but yeah. I think it's unlikely to have flow-on effects in terms of questioning where we stand on that issue in New Zealand. But the arguments around it, will engage people's interest. I think it's certainly. The law doesn't settle the ethical issues. There are many things that we have laws on that we can still debate from an ethical point of view. Right. And I think there are people of all stripes in New Zealand who will be engaged by the arguments being bandied around in the US at the moment. But I certainly would hope and think it's unlikely that we would change what's fairly settled law in New Zealand.
Maybe if nothing else, it has started up a conversation around women's health in general, and what that means for New Zealand, as opposed to being too worried about one particular aspect being taken away from what editor or whatever. So maybe that's what's happening in New Zealand. That's helpful to the community discourse.
Well, yes, I think if that's a sort of silver lining, then I think that's very, very good. It's also very important to be aware of the broader implications of this for women's health, children's health in the US, an enormous country, an extremely important country, and it's just a huge setback. And so understanding what it really means for people's lives in a country like that, a country that, in some ways, you sort of lump countries together in terms of broadly liberal democracies like our own, and this decision in America is very troubling for seeing some of those kinships you might have thought of between democratic countries like ours and the US. Those are really being strained, I think.
I think the point you just made as well, and we talked about this a bit last night, about the size of the country is important for us to remember, because we can't really relate to it. And I don't know what the law is going to change to, if at all, in, say, Alaska. But, it takes 6 hours to fly from one side of the country to the other. If you're in Alaska, which is a Republican state, and they ban abortion there, it might be a 3-hour flight. So basically New Zealand to Australia, or maybe a 15-hour drive through another country, being Canada, to actually get to it. And I don't think we've got the scale for that. But if people thought about having to drive from the top of North Island to the bottom of the South Island and then back to the top of the North Island, that's 1,500, that's 3,000. Yeah, that's close to, maybe even back down to Wellington, that's close to the distance of one side to the other. So yeah, thinking about having medical access to something you need being a 10-hour drive away, I just don't think we can understand that based on the size of our country.
No, I think that's right. And I mean, this is certainly more in the realm of practical issues than ethical issues, but for sure I would agree that certainly scale is, I mean, it's very, very hard. I lived in the US for quite a long time before coming back to New Zealand, and I've always struggled to get my head around the size of the country. It's enormous, and if you think of some of the states where this is really going to have implications for people, some of the big rural states, access to healthcare is already extremely difficult in some of those rural areas. And it's also, it's time to get to somewhere. But I mean, many people who might want access to these services don't have access to a vehicle. They can't get time off work to do that. They have other children who are dependent. So the distance, the time, the effort that it would take to access those services make them functionally inaccessible, unavailable to many people.
From the Bioethics Centre at the University of Otago, Dr Elizabeth Fenton. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm very glad you jumped on to have a chat with us about this issue in general.
That's great. Thanks, Pat.
All righty, Mighty, there you go. So I feel like saying, we could have done that interview where I've gone, ethically speaking, does it make sense? No. Okay. Thanks for joining us today, because it doesn't. As we were saying, you can't, the idea of my body, my choice being the same thing as one is a singular individual body autonomy thing. The other one is talking about affecting the person next to you. If you need or get a vaccine, I still think actually that's a load of bollocks, because no one's being forced to take a vaccine. That's the first thing. But if you need to get a vaccine, it's to protect yourself and also the person next to you. If you need to have an abortion, it's about yourself. there's no health issues for the person next to you or the neighbor or someone else. So it's not ever going to be the same. Speaking of a few things that have been bouncing around in the chats tonight, Emperor says Sweden has a massive military industrial complex, but not being part of NATO has not really hampered sales to NATO countries, e.g. Gripen fighters, in-law missiles as well. We talked a bit about that haka at the start of the show. Sirius says that haka was an amazing moment, says the Irish giving of the jersey was a great moment. Yeah, I should look it up. There's another moment, and I think it was for Munster. Now, let me Google it. This is good, isn't it? If I go Maori, Māori All Blacks, Munster, and it was Anthony Foley. So yeah, that was the I'll bring this up and show you. I'll show you same things. That was the Māori All Blacks in 2016 doing the same thing. For Anthony Foley passed away, I think the week of the game, and they did a similar thing for an Irish club. So. That's probably why it was repaid in kind. So that's a Māori All Blacks jersey that says AF on the back of it, and then they did their haka, which was amazing, and then the family of Anthony Foley, I think, came on to get the jersey. So it was a similar sort of thing.
Well, big cheer. And a very emotional haka from the Māori All Blacks. The black shirt with AF written on it on pitch.
And if you're watching, the little circle in the middle there was the boys coming on, the sons of the fallen coach.
Emotions have been really flying high, but if that doesn't get the people on TV, if that doesn't get the people on the ground, and look at that. The Foley family coming out to collect Anthony Foley's two young boys coming out to collect that jersey.
So I have to be honest with you, I don't know if this is kind of a tradition within the rugby world, full stop, or specifically because the Māori All Blacks did that to an Irish club, that means the Irish team did it back to the Māori All Blacks. So I'm not sure which way it goes, but that's what it is. Ben also says of that moment, definitely a nice gesture, but a weird vibe with her back to the Irish, etc. No acknowledgement to the gift. She did acknowledge, because I'm pretty sure when she walked on, this is Sean Wainui's, I'm assuming, partner, she looked straight at the Irish and kind of nodded and did that. So I think you might have just missed something there, Ben. Obviously, she did acknowledge the Māori All Blacks more. Whether one thinks that's appropriate or not, I guess, is a conversation. But I think she definitely did acknowledge the Irish for the gift as well. All right, now, if you are watching us, you can see what's happening along the bottom. We started up a Facebook page just yesterday, and all of our broadcasts are being put on the Facebook page, as well as all our clips, and there'll be bits and pieces, other bits and pieces in there as well. So if you haven't done so already, if you wanted to head to our Facebook page and like it, subscribe to it, that would be a great help. Facebook.com/Big Hairy News. The other thing is, if you are watching us on YouTube, which is where most people do watch us, a subscription to that would be good as well. DOCNZ Studios is where this gets carried. And finally, just to do all the kind of messages, this becomes a daily audio podcast at the end of the show. It's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google Podcasts, and it's on Spotify. If you head along to those and just search #BHN or Big Hairy News, you will find us. If you subscribe to us, then every episode gets uploaded as an audio version directly after the episode has finished. Means you can get it into your device and listen to it on the way to work tomorrow morning or something like that, should you miss some of our content. If you are listening to us on Apple Podcasts, then a rate and a review would be appreciated, because it helps us with the algorithms. And that's about it for tonight. Tomorrow night, Anna Brooks is coming back to see us. Anna Brooks, of course, is working in the labs of Auckland University on long COVID. I want to have a bit of a touch base around COVID at the moment. I spoke to Anna today for 3 to 5 minutes, and it seems that once again we're needing to share information that the 9th floor of the Beehive is not. So one of the things I like to be able to do is go straight into the lab and speak to the people who are in the labs doing the work, as opposed to the people in the Beehive who are taking the information from the lab, deciding what the population wants to hear and what will look good in the polls, and then disseminating it on. So we go straight to the labs to give you the information. Anna's going to be with us from 10:05, and she'll be with us live. It's not a pre-recorded conversation. So every time Anna comes on, we always offer you the opportunity to ask questions and comments. If you've got anything specifically you want to know about COVID and what's happening at the moment with COVID in the country. All right, team, that's us. Thanks for joining us. Hashtag share our shit is the hashtag we use because we want you to share our shit. And if you want to support us, that's the best thing you can do right now, is you can just tell people about us and share what we do. Stay safe. We will catch you tomorrow night from 10 p.m. All right, my friends. Hooroo.